Napoleon afterwards recounted to me some part of his early life, said that after having been at school at Brienne, he was sent to Paris at the age of 15 or 16, where at the general examination, continued he, being found to have given the best answers in mathematics, I was appointed to the artillery. After the revolution, about 1/3 of the artillery officers emigrated, and I became chef de bataillon at the siege of Toulon, having been proposed by the artillery officers themselves as the person who amongst them possessed the most knowledge of the science. During the siege, I commanded the artillery, directed the operations against the town, and took O'Hara prisoner, as I formerly told you. After the siege, I was made commandant of artillery of the Army of Italy, and my plans caused the capture of many considerable fortresses in Switzerland and Italy. On my return to Paris, I was made general, and the command of the Army of La Vendée was offered to me, which I refused, and replied that such a command was only fit for a general of gendarmerie. On the 13th of Vendemiaire, I commanded the army of the Convention in Paris against the sections, whom I defeated after an action of a few minutes. Subsequently, I got the command of the Army of Italy, where I established my reputation. Nothing, continued he, has been more simple than my elevation. It was not the result of intrigue or crime. It was owing to the peculiar circumstances of the times, and because I fought successfully against the enemies of my country. What is most extraordinary, and I believe unparalleled history, is that I rose from being a private person to the astonishing height of power I possessed without having committed a single crime to obtain it. If I were on my deathbed, I could make the same declaration. I asked if it were true that he was indebted to Barras for employment at Toulon, and if he had ever offered his services to the English. Both are false, replied Napoleon. I had no connection with Barras until after the affair of Toulon. It was to Gasperin, deputy for Orange, and a man of talent, to whom I was chiefly indebted for protection at Toulon and support against the set of ignorantacci sent down by the convention. I never in my life offered my service to England, nor ever intended it. Nor did I ever intend to go to Constantinople. All those accounts, sont de roman, are mere romances. I passed a short time with Paoli in Corsica in the year blank, who was very partial to me, and to whom I was much attached. Paoli espoused the cause of the English faction, and I that of the French, and consequently most of my family were driven away from Corsica. Paoli often patted me on the head, saying, "You are one of Plutarch's men." He divined that I should be something extraordinary. He spoke about the expedition to Copenhagen. That expedition, said he, showed great energy on the part of your ministers, but sitting aside the violation of the laws of nations, which you committed, for in fact it was nothing but a robbery, I think that it was injurious to your interests, as it made the brave Danish nation irreconcilable enemies to you, and in fact shut you out of the north for 3 years. When I heard of it, I said, I'm glad of it, as it will embroil England irrecoverably with the northern powers. The Danes being able to join me with 16 sails of the line was of but little consequence. I had plenty of ships. I only wanted seamen, whom you did not take, and whom I obtained afterwards. While by the expedition your ministers established their characters as faithless and as persons with whom no engagements, no laws were binding. During the war with you, he said, all the intelligence I received from England came through the smugglers. They are terrible people and have courage and ability to do anything for money. They had at first a part in Dunkirk allotted to them, to which they were restricted, but they latterly went out of their limits, committed riots, and insulted everybody. I ordered grave lines to be prepared for their reception, where they had a little camp for their accommodation, beyond which they were not permitted to go. At one time, there were upwards of 500 of them in Dunkirk. I had every information I wanted through them. They brought over newspapers and dispatches from the spies that we had in London. They took over spies from France, landed and kept them in their houses for some days, then dispersed them over the country, brought them back when wanted. The police had in pay a number of French emigrants who gave constant information to the actions of the Vendean party, George and others. At the time, they were preparing to assassinate me. All their movements were made known. Besides, the police had in pay many English spies, some of high quality, amongst whom there were many ladies. There was one lady in particular, very high rank, who furnished considerable information and was sometimes paid so high as £3,000 in 1 month. They came over, continued he, in boats not broader than this bath. It was really astonishing to see them passing your 74-gun ships in defiance. I observed that they were double spies and that they brought intelligence from France to the British government. That is very likely, replied Napoleon. They brought you newspapers, but I believe that as spies, they did not convey much intelligence to you. They are gentils terribili. Terrible people, and did great mischief to your government. They took from France annually 40 or 50 millions of silks and brandy. They assisted the French prisoners to escape from England. The relations of Frenchmen, prisoners in your country, were accustomed to go to Dunkirk and make a bargain with them to bring over a certain prisoner. All that they wanted was name, age, and private token, by means of which the prisoner might repose confidence in them. Generally, in a short time afterwards, they effected it. As for men like them, they had a great deal of honor in their dealings. They offered several times to bring over Louis and the rest of the Bourbons for a sum of money, but they wanted to stipulate that if they met with any accident or interruption to the design, they might be allowed to massacre them. This I would not consent to. Besides, I despised the Bourbons too much and had no fear of them. Indeed, at that time, they were no more thought of in France than the Stuarts were in England. They also offered to bring over Dumouriez, Sarrazin, and others whom they thought I hated, but I held them in too much contempt to take any trouble about them. The conversation was brought over about my telling him that Lefebvre Desnouettes had arrived at New York and was with his brother Joseph when I asked if Lefebvre had not broken his parole in England. Napoleon replied that he had, and then observed, a great deal has been said about French officers having been employed after having broken their parole in England. Now, the fact is that the English themselves were the first to break their parole at a time when 12 of them ran away. I proposed afterwards to your ministers that both governments should reciprocally send back every prisoner, whatsoever rank he might be, who had broken his parole and escaped. This they refused to do, and I became indifferent about it. I did not receive at court those who escaped or encourage them nor discourage them. After this refusal, your ministers made a great fuss, chiasso, about officers who broke their parole, having been employed in my armies, though they refused to agree to the only measure which could put them to stop it, viz. that both sides should send them back immediately, and afterwards had the impudence to attempt to throw all the odium upon me, but you English can never do anything wrong. I asked if he thought that the expedition to Walcheren might, if it had been well conducted, have taken Antwerp. Napoleon replied, I am of opinion that if you had landed a few thousand men at first at Williamstadt and marched directly for Antwerp, that between consternation, want of preparation, and the uncertainty of the number of assailants, you might have taken it by a coup de main. But after the fleet had got up, it was impossible, as the crews of the ship, united to the National Guard, workmen and others, amounted to upwards of 15,000 men. The ship would have been sunk or taken to the docks, and the crews employed upon the batteries. Besides, Antwerp, though old, is strongly fortified. It is true that Lord Cheetham did everything possible to ensure the failure of the object of the expedition, but after the delay of a few days, it would have been impossible for any man to have effected it. You had Too many and too few men. Too many for a coup de main and too few for a regular siege. The inhabitants were all against you, as they clearly saw that your object was to get possession of the town, to burn and destroy everything, and then go to your ships and get away. It was a very bad expedition for you. Your ministers were very badly informed about the country. You had afterwards the bêtise to stay in that pestilential place until you lost some thousands of men. C'était le comble de la bêtise et de l'humanité. I was very glad of it, as I knew that disease would carry you off by thousands and oblige you to evacuate it without any exertion being made on my part. I sent none but deserters and mauvais sujets to garrison and gave orders that they should sleep in 2 frigates I had sent there for that purpose. I also had water conveyed to them at a great expense, but still it was most unhealthy. The general who commanded Flushing added he did not defend it as long as he ought to have done. He had made a large fortune by the smugglers, as there was another depot with them there, and had been guilty of some malpractice for which he was afraid of being brought to a court-martial, and I believe was glad to get away. I asked him if it were true that a Corsican named Masseria had been sent with some proposals to him once by our government. Napoleon replied, Masseria? Yes, I recall perfectly well that he was brought to me when I was first consul. He was introduced with great mystery and secrecy into my room when I was in a bath, as I am now. I think he began to speak about some political matters and to make some insinuations about peace, but I stopped him, as it had been published in the English papers that he was coming upon submission to me, which I did not like. Besides, Messeria, though, and bravissimo uomo, a very fine man, was a great boulevard talker. I believe that he was sent by King George himself. He was a Republican and maintained that the death of Charles I was just and necessary. Lady Lowe came up to Longwood and for the first time paid a visit to Countess Bertrand and Montauban. The 6th. Napoleon observed to me that the visit of Lady Lowe yesterday appeared to him to be an artifice of her husband, pour guettare la pauvre negli occhi, to throw dust in the eyes, to make people believe that notwithstanding the arrest of Lescaze's governor was very well at Longwood and had only done his duty, and that there was no foundation for the reports which have been spread of the ill treatment said to be inflicted upon the inhabitants of Longwood. I informed him that Lady Lowe had been always desirous to call upon Countess Bertrand and Montauban and had embraced the first opportunity which presented itself after her accouchement. Napoleon replied, I am far from thinking that she participates in the designs of her husband, but she has badly chosen the time at the moment when he treats Lescaze so barbarously and illegally. He sends her up. It is either an artifice of her husband's to blind the world, or else he mocks our misfortunes. Nothing is so insulting as to add irony to injury. I observed that more probably it was a preliminary step of the governor's towards an accommodation. No, replied Napoleon, that cannot be. If he really wished to accommodate matters, the first step would be to take away some of his useless and oppressive restrictions. Yesterday, after his wife had been here, Madame Bertrand and family went out to walk. On their return, they were stopped and seized by sentinels who refused to let them in because it was 6 o'clock. Now, in the name of God, if he had a mind to accommodate, would he continue to prevent us from taking a walk at the only time of the day when, at this season, it is agreeable? Tell him, continued Napoleon, candidly the observations I've made. If he asks you what I thought of the visit,